First and foremost, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our session on engaging graduate students in your community. In case we haven't had a chance to meet, I'm Joseph Green, one of your two 2021 IEEE-HKN student governors and a third-year PhD student at Boston University. So when it comes to being a graduate student with an HKN, I've had a bit of experience. I was inducted in my junior year of my undergrad, and I remained a prominent member in my chapter through my transfer into the graduate program. So I did my undergrad at BU. I'm doing a grad program at BU. And throughout that, I've been a member. I've been on the e-board a couple of times, president of the organization, and now act as an advisor for the organization. And I really hope through this presentation, we can encourage our chapters a little bit more towards engaging graduate students and enable you with a couple of tactics to effectively do so. And speaking with me today is Sandro Sartoni.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandro. I'm the other student governor together with Joe. I'm too a PhD student at my third year, starting from November. And I've been inducted in HKN as a grad student. So I've never been an undergrad student and HKN. Just to let you know that we are looking for grad students. I'm an example of that. And it's really good to have you here with us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation later.
Awesome. Yeah, and if everyone's good, let's get started. So first and foremost, I know the title of this talk is Engaging Graduate Students, but we really want to do it from the perspective of you. Our chapters. Our chapters are the backbone of our organizations, and we as an organization would be nowhere without your contributions. Just to let you know how much impact our chapters have, our 267 chapters last year, and I remind you, this is during a pandemic, reported over 40,000 hours of activities, 25,000 of which has been service and outreach activities. So really, we can change the message of this presentation, not exactly to engaging graduate students, but giving you a new tool to succeed. Because honestly, it's amazing what you do as chapters. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be a student governor and see everything that you do. The outreach, the service, the tutoring initiatives, the technical events, how you engage your community in new and unique ways is inspiring. And I'm really excited to help you along in this journey and tell you a little bit about how focusing on some graduate communities within your chapter can definitely help you in achieving your local goals and us on an international platform as well. So first and foremost, the first aspect I wanted to talk about, a little bit more of a general idea before we get into grad students in particular, is your chapter web. Believe it or not, all of our chapters are way more connected than we even see. Right now, we're seeing the web that I could come up with basically our local assets. So this is everything that you see at your university. You have other students, you have your student members, departments, professional members, advisors, alumni, and of course, the higher HKN organization, which is us. These are your primary points of contact at your local university. And it's amazing because just through these primary points of contact, our chapters have an increasingly expanding web of different assets available to achieve our different missions. So for example, if you want to hold a technical event, you can go through any inducted professional member or any advisor to get to recruiters and companies, or through your student members to meet new student candidates, to get to your local communities and have some outreach programming. It's actually really cool. I actually did a more complicated web than this, doing more connections, but it got really messy. So I simplified it here a little bit. But I want this to be a little bit of encouragement in really getting to the theme of this presentation, that the more connections we have as a local chapter, the further and the bigger our web can become in terms of our outreach. Now, when it comes to the assets within your chapter, there's really comprising of 4 different members that comprise HKN and 4 different members that comprise your chapter population. The 4 members within HKN and the 4 members you can find within your chapter is first and foremost our undergraduate student members. Especially for our local chapters, this is really the heart of our membership. These are the people that you're bringing in mass. These are the people showing up to your events. These are the people contributing to your e-board and ideas and helping to fund us through induction fees or connections that they bring with us. This is a very important aspect to our chapter and the chief population you typically see when engaging with your chapter. Another key aspect is professional members. We know professional members as maybe some people on the board of governors or some people that you've met along the way, but chapters themselves can induct professional members. In fact, that's how we get professional members. So professional members within our chapters can really be seen as our primary connection to industry and academia. They are great, great, great assets to formalize a relationship between a department or a company that's made an impact on you. If you have a repeated guest speaker that's invested in your group, or a professor that's invested in helping you succeed, you can induct them and really get a strong asset in your back corner. Another very popular member you engage with as a chapter are alumni members, those student members that have gone past their student career and now are professionals in industry and academia. And what's amazing about engaging with alumni members is they're really the long-term membership of HKN. They've seen a lot within our organization, and they've seen a lot within your chapter as well. And last and not least, one other group that is for induction is graduate student members, which will be the focus of this talk. But I just want to set the stage that while we'll be narrowing on graduate student members in particular, there's many different communities that comprise your chapters, and each brings something unique to you. Building off of that point, one aspect I wanted to dive into is we can look at all these different members that comprise HKN and really say, so what? You know, we get by just having, undergraduate members, or we get by not inducting professional members, or we get by not inducting graduate student members. And first of all, that's okay. Every chapter has their own vision. Every chapter has their own operations and their own goals year to year and semester to semester. But one thing we want to encourage is the more varied your connections are, the more varied your experiences you can offer to your chapter can be. By inducting some professionals, you can all of a sudden start seeing some awesome new opportunities to tour a company or get exclusive opportunities. If you bring in, let's say, new undergraduate student members from a new department, for example, or a new major that you typically don't induct with, that's all of a sudden a new field of students that you're bringing in with their own varied experiences and connections. By increasing your engagement with alumni, you all of a sudden have a tangible living history of your chapter and your past struggles and accomplishments. To that point in particular, for newer chapters like mine, Kappa Sigma, it's awesome. You can actually meet people going back to when the chapter was first either formed or reactivated. And that's been such a huge asset. I was a chapter leader, as I mentioned, and going back to the people that started this thing and learning what worked and what didn't helped so much through my tenure in terms of succeeding. And last and not least, graduate students are another very important aspect of your chapter ecosystem in the fact that they can really provide a knowledge or perspective on being an academic or through the academic or student experience, in the sense that graduate students in your college and graduate students in your community, well, they've been through undergrad, they've been through industry, they've done new internships, or they've met with new professionals, or they were inducted at another university. And so they have all this wealth of experiences while being at your local institution and are ready to access population that is willing to connect with you and provide many benefits to your chapter. Now, narrowing the scope a little bit to graduate students in particular, one thing that incentivized this talk was really going through and enumerating what we saw as the value of including graduate students within a chapter. And really, there's a couple of key points I want to touch upon for any chapters that might be on the fence, whether or not to include graduate students more heavily. A couple of the benefits we see of including graduate students into a chapter is really they're another form of continuity. If you think about HKN undergrad inductees, they're inducted typically into their junior and senior year. They're part of the chapter for a year or two, and then move on as alumni member into a new career. And they can remain engaged, but they won't be as engaged as they were as students on your campus. Well, graduate student members, as we'll talk about in 1 second, can be inducted after their first semester of their program. And if they're a master's or a PhD student, they can stay part of your university culture for anywhere from 2 to, I've heard the horror story, 9-year PhD programs. It terrifies me every time I say that. But regardless, they stick around your university culture for a long time. So these can be very reliable people for showing up to your events, contributing to your chapter, contributing ideas, and growing your chapter community over the course of time. In addition, as we talked about before, graduate students have been through what many of your other immediate chapter members, your undergraduate student members, are going through. They can be great mentors to your community, telling them, well, here's what I did to get through this class in undergrad, or here's how I manage work-life balance under these situations, or here's how I got that internship. They're really great assets in terms of allowing them to feel appreciated for their experience by giving back to your undergraduate members and helping them through their current path. In addition, kind of as we talked about, graduate student members can come with a wealth of experiences as well. They could have previous internships, they could have previous thesis projects, they could have previous university experience, and all of this is potential new connections for your chapter. There's been a couple of cases at our university that we engaged with a new graduate student who was connected to their induction chapter from across the country. And now all of a sudden, this enables us to get in contact with that chapter and do something cool and collaborative together. And in addition, many of the graduate students that you see entering your program have some degree of leadership experience. So maybe they were president of a past chapter or advisor of a past chapter, or were on the e-board of another chapter, and they can give you some insights into what worked and what didn't work over the tenure to help your chapter learn and grow. One of the nice aspects about graduate student members, and something that we see a lot of misconceptions about, is what exactly does it take to induct a graduate student member? We know for our undergraduate student members that when it comes to it, we typically have the GPA requirement. So, like if you're a sophomore, you need to be in the top 5th of your class, junior top 4th, senior top 3rd of your class. And if your GPA is above that, then you must fulfill obligations to character and attitude, or other 2 tenets to be inducted into HKN. Well, inducting a grad student is actually easier because the assumption is by getting into grad school, you've taken care of that scholarship tenet. You've already proven that. So this means there's no GPA requirement. Right now, all you need to do to be inducted as a graduate student in HKN is complete 1 semester in a IEEE field of interest. And that's it. You're ready to be inducted. And on top of that, we do ask that if you have a connection to your department head, to discuss with them and have them recommend graduate students to the chapter. So you complete 1 semester, you have the department head give a letter of recommendation for graduate students that have stuck out for the other 2 tenets, and that's it. They're ready to be inducted. They pay the fee and go to the induction ritual. And typically we see in our chapters that if they have other chapter-based requirements, like number of hours you need to participate in a HKN or in your chapter events before being inducted, we typically see these obligations reduced as well. Cool. Now, one aspect we want to talk about is it's really a 2-way street when it comes to inducting graduate student members, where by including graduate student members, what we talked about previously is they can add to your chapter community and bring a wealth of experiences with them, which can aid your chapter operations. But on the flip side, it's a role of a chapter to then turn around and also make sure they're providing value to those graduate students that entered that community. This is the best way to get graduate students involved, recognize some of the unique needs that they have, and work towards addressing them. Now, one aspect we did to really try and get a pulse on what graduate students are struggling with and looking for within HKN is Sandro, Katie, and I actually went out and developed a graduate student survey, which we've been circulating around with HKN grad students that we know. So we have a number of different grad students who responded from most of our regions in a number of different programs, from Master of Science, Master of Engineering, to PhD, to even a couple of recent graduates who answered this. And we asked them a couple of simple questions. What's your goals after graduation? And as well, what would you like HKN to focus on in the near future? Now, this provides feedback for us as an organization, but also to you as a chapter. Knowing what graduate students are looking for and most likely looking for really enables you to create targeting advertisement and event initiatives to go through and allure them to the chapter operations. So for example, when we asked, what are your goals after graduation? There was a couple of obvious answers, entering industry versus entering academia. Of course, everyone would have to enter this in some way or fashion, but there's a couple of other very interesting answers. A large number of graduate students are looking to build their professional network, develop a startup, and become a mentor. Well, becoming a mentor That's really useful for your chapter. If you set up some mentorship programs between graduate students and undergrads, you're fulfilling something that graduate students are looking for and aiding your undergraduate population. Developing a startup, that's super interesting. Maybe hold a couple of classes on entrepreneurship or invite a couple of successful startups in your area to come and talk at your chapter. That's something that will interest a large amount of individuals, not just graduate students. As for HKN focuses, one key issue that we saw across the board by a large margin is grad students are looking for networking and mentorship with professionals. So this could be a very key way of engaging, again, number of populations within your chapters. It looks like graduate students themselves are interested in becoming mentors, but are also interested in developing meaningful connections with professionals in the workplace as it stands. So this gives at a glance a couple of ways that we can start formulating ideas to best engage with graduate students within a chapter and build that stronger community together. Reinforcing this idea, we asked a couple of other questions. One question, which I converted into this word cloud, is what do graduate students like in the chapter? And overwhelmingly, we started to see a lot of words that were based around interpersonal connections, community, network, students, people. Joining grad school can be a very difficult process, especially if you go to a new university. And HKN can play a key role in making incoming grad students feel like they have a community and have a network they can rely on to get through these unique challenges. And with that in mind, this is really a key point that could draw in a lot of attention with graduate students. Reach out to first-year incoming graduate students and, maybe do a grad student event for them. Do a yearly repeating event to get that transparency on campus and show them you're a community that would like to address their needs and bring them into a welcoming organization. If you know about people coming from another chapter to your university, you can reach out to them. If they're an HKN inductee at another university, they don't need to be reinducted. They can just join your chapter off the cuff. So there's a number of different ways to leverage the fact that a lot of grad students like our community and like the community aspect of our chapter to really make sure we're alluring and engaging graduate students as they enter the university cycle. One aspect I like to say is if you can get a graduate student early, like in that first year, you just made a friend for your chapter for the next 5. And that's a great asset to have when trying to build your network on campus. In addition, I also asked the question, how can HKN improve? And this kind of goes off of that earlier point on focuses, but we can really see a lot more words that are based around networking. So we have outreach, events, networking, connections, interpersonal. These sort of words popped up a lot. And exclusive, this is another very interesting one. What seems like with our chapters and with HKN, graduate students are looking for a little bit more attention in terms of specific programming and as well the opportunity to really network amongst other graduate student peers to talk about the challenges of graduate school and as well connect with professionals. Because just like undergrads, graduate students have that big question after they finish their programming: what the heck am I going to do next? What happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if I'm deciding to go on a different path than I'm on? And giving them the opportunity to flourish by connecting with professionals and professors in your sphere can go a long way towards aiding them on that journey. Because the word cloud didn't really do the best job of captivating all of the ideas that I found in the answer to this question, I did go through and screenshot just a couple of comments in particular, just to make sure that we captured a couple of these different aspects that graduate students are looking for, because we're going to have a discussion section after this presentation where I'm going to encourage us in the audience to really talk about a couple of different ways we can affect graduate students within our community. So going through a couple of comments that I saw, having chapters reach out to the ECE departments to contact first-year PhD students about staying involved. So this is something I saw recurrently, that many of the graduate students within HKN were finding later in their program. Like it wasn't the first year or the second year, but maybe the third, fourth, or fifth year, and they feel like they missed out on those first couple of opportunities. By being HKN and forming good connections with your department, you suddenly have all those assets to help you get in contact with many different student groups, such as incoming graduate students in the fields that you wish to induct. Other people talked quite a bit about Well, more networking aspects. So doing not just networking with professionals, but inter-chapter events. People really like the chapter community once they get involved and really like the idea of building upon that with other chapters. And I can tell you from experience, and I know Sandro can as well, that by engaging with other chapters, it can really go a long way towards building meaningful relationships for everyone within both chapters, whether undergrad, graduate students, or professional or alumni members. And in addition, there's a number of unique struggles that graduate students face historically throughout the course of the program. Like, for example, I know that fears about what comes in the future or whether to go into industry or academia or imposter syndrome are really big themes in graduate programs across the world. And recognizing these unique challenges graduate students have is really the best way that we as an organization and we as chapters can really inject value into the graduate student membership and encourage more participation. We don't need to necessarily give all the answers, but even just by recognizing these aspects that graduate students go through that, let's be honest, the program's not really going to address, can really go a long way for making HKN feel like a home. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sandro, who's going to walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Yep, thank you, Joe. So we have seen what grad students are looking for, why it's important for us to have them in our chapters. So let's now go through the journey of how do we build some content, how do we tailor our activities in order to meet the needs of grad students. The very, very first step I think it's really crucial to address here is we need to provide value to grad students, because it might be obvious, and in some ways it is, but when you build a program for someone, you have to put them at the center of your attention and think about what is important to them and make sure that you meet those needs. So what do grad students often look for? For instance, opportunities to share their research and experiences, networking and job opportunities, community and social ties, mentorship and career development. So the very first thing you have to ask yourselves is, how do I make sure that I meet these needs? So going to the next slide, we can see this really nice picture here. Networking community ties, we have seen that is something that grad students value a lot, also based on what Joe was showing us before. And I'd say that this is really important, not only for grad students, I'd say for all students, because at the end of the day, undergrad students and grad students have different needs, of course, but we are all students at the end of the day. And meeting new people is important, not only because you need new friends, but also because talking with other people can, it leads you to something, to some knowledge, to some opportunities you weren't even aware of. And these kind of activities, with some small adjustments, can be easily done for undergrad and grad students as well. Now, let's say that you have decided that you're going to look for grad students and you have thought of, what's important for them. How do I find grad students in my campus community? The very first thing to do, very easy, is to ask your department to produce a list of first-year grad students. And this is usually effective in the sense that you have a nice list of people you can contact. If they can do this, you can look to introductory courses or email grad students and then start from there. Another thing that you can do, together with talking to your department, is organizing public events in your campus. So if some of you have attended the session earlier today on best practices, we have talked about the importance of having public events. And we have seen how public events can be strategic. This is one way why they're important. You can engage with new people through events. Say, for instance, you're looking for grad students. Why don't you have, for instance, a virtual booth or a booth if you're in person, good for you, for grad students to stop by and talk with you? And also you could be transparent during grad school tours and orientations. So, this is something that is fairly easy. At the same time, it shows grad students that you are actively looking for them, you care for them. Easy but effective. And if you don't, I really suggest you starting building social media platforms. If you have them, you could start advertising on social media. Or if you don't, you could use department and school newsletter to spread the word that you are looking for them. So going to the next slide, how do I advertise for grad students? In my experience, you have to think as if you were a grad student and ask your question, how am I going to benefit from this? Because once you are in HKN and you get to know new people and you form that bond with other people, you meet new friends, at that point, the simple fact that you have friends there is sufficient, at least in my experience, to motivate you and be active in your chapter. But in the very first place, when you join a new society, a new association in your university community, you are looking for something. How am I going to, what things can I learn from this association? How am I going to grow? And so I think it's really important to make sure you highlight the benefits they get by joining HKN. So why should I be interested? There are two questions I think you should always keep in mind when advertising in general. Let's say, now I'm going to, apply this to grad students. Why would grad students spend part of their free time with us? It's volunteering, so it's not like they're earning money, right? Or what do they get from HKN that they cannot find elsewhere? Otherwise, HKN is just another association, but it is not. So how do we make sure that they are aware of the importance of being in HKN? And another point here would be is let them know that they can always reach out, even for info. And this comes from my personal experience as well. Like when I arrived here in Turin as a grad student, I was looking for, an association. Two guys from this picture you can see here introduced HKN to us. And so I talked with them. And I was interested, but at the same time, I was scared because I wasn't sure how much time it would take from my, free time to be part of HKN. And I was scared because I wasn't sure I had enough time to provide. But they told me that the timing requirement was not a problem. I've seen that I could manage it with no problems, and so I decided to join. And then eventually, with time, I spent more and more time than I originally intended to. But that's, of course, my free decision. But you see, sometimes people are actually interested in joining you, but they're afraid because they have some things they still don't know. Talking freely with them can really be important. So next slide, please. Of course, you as well might have some fears and misconceptions, and that's perfectly normal. So here in this slide, I've summarized 3 questions I believe they are really important, and I'm here with answers, or at least some suggestions. And these questions and the answers I'm going to provide you, the suggestions I'm going to give you, were taken from a document we have built. You can find the link in the bottom part of the slide, and I really suggest you to go through the document because I believe it's really important for all of you. So the first question would be, will inducting grad students detract from undergrad students? And the answer is no. On the contrary, it adds value. And I guess you can understand why, because grad students are, most times than not, people who have been through the same path, or a similar path at least, than those of the undergrad students. for instance, when I joined HKN, there were people who were my seniors, like 1 or 2 years ahead of me. And I've learned so much from them, like how is this course? Would you recommend doing this course with that professor? Or even the thesis. Like I decided to do the thesis with my then thesis supervisor, now my PhD supervisor, because one of my friends from the Mono chapter suggested me to do so. So it actually adds value. It does not distract. Another question would be, what if my faculty advisor or department head is under the impression that IEEE-HKN is not for graduate students? By this time, I hope you are convinced that we are not against graduate students. On the contrary, we are suggesting you to reach out to them. But still, if they're under the impression that it is not for graduate students, I suggest you to show the document you can find at the bottom part of this slide. And even let them know that there were more than one session on the SLC, talking about this point. It's really important. The only reason why a chapter cannot induct grad students is if the university doesn't provide any graduate program in the technical fields of IEEE. In that case, of course. Yeah, sure.
Just to build off of that point, you can show them the document, but if that's not convincing, we definitely do recommend reach out to us. We're always here to help you. So whether it's the student governors, your regional governor, or even someone like Nancy or a staff member to get you the help you need in terms of convincing people about HKN inductions.
Of course, we are always here to help. So that's always a possibility. Thank you, Joe, for highlighting that. And finally, how should a department head choose who to endorse? And the answer to this question would be, much like undergraduate participation in HKN, potential candidates should be judged under the core tenets of scholarship, character, and attitude. So it works in a similar way as for undergrad students. We really do believe in those three core values, and we judge all students by those. Moving on to the next slide, please.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have the event ideas next, but since we had to start a little bit late because of the candidate form running over, I do want to get to the discussion part. Do you mind if we just maybe briefly touch upon these three and then move on to the discussion?
Of course, no problem. So the point of these three slides would simply be to say you have grad students. We have seen how it's important to provide them some content that might be important for them, but you don't really have an idea of what events to build for them. So here are just three simple ideas you can think of. Research spotlight, let them talk about their research activity. Alumni experience panel, because graduate and undergrad students share the same fears, and so bringing in alumni and their experience might be useful. And workshop with companies, bring in some companies, let them have some workshops with our students, maybe share their resume, might be really useful. Grad students might be looking for a job, and so can be relevant also for undergrad students as well. Now for the important part, let's have a word with you. Let me just take a look at the chat.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. So what we were hoping to do during this part of the presentation is really engage with the people in the audience to talk about a couple of these points and brainstorm effective ways to bring graduate students into your community. So first and foremost, I want to give the invite. If you'd like to join us on stage to talk, please request to share your video and audio. We'll gladly bring you on stage to join us to this conversation. And the first question I want to pose, and please feel free to join that on stage to answer this or put it in the chat, is we talked a lot about the value of HKN and the value of HKN for graduate students. And I would like to have our audience answer that question. Either for you, what's the value of HKN, or what do you think the value of HKN for graduate students is?
By the way, while people answer that question, I was taking a look at the poll and I see that the majority of our voters have, in fact, some grad students, but less than 50% of inductees. And also,
as we wait, do you want to answer that question, Sandro?
What is the value of HKN for grad students? I mean, when I arrived here, I didn't know anyone. Like, I didn't know anyone in Turin, and so no one in my university community as well. HKN has been the very first consistent group of friends I've made here. Has been the very start, very beginning of that. And also, I really found really important, networking with my peers and seniors and getting to know from them insights from their personal experience. Really useful for me.
I like it. And I also like Katie's answer here. She talks about community and getting to be more than just a researcher. I think that's definitely a box we can feel ourselves trapped in, where even within social events that might be held by the university, like what's the number one icebreaker for us grad students? It's, what are you working on? And it can be kind of hard to escape that bubble as an independent researcher versus like a person moving through this highly stressful program. And I really feel that too. Like HKN is a great place to be yourself and flourish in interests that might not necessarily be directly related to your research topic.
Also because oftentimes I find that the most relevant conversation start from random nights out.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Let's continue with that. Oh, here we go. Kai also mentioned in the chat, you get to see anybody who isn't in your lab, and they're good people to spend time with. And that's another really good point. It's like some of us might not be part of really big labs. And if you're isolated to that lab, it can feel very, very trying in terms of trying to build social connections. And HKN is a great place to build social connections, whether within your chapter or between collaborations or within other chapters. So that's a really, really good point as well.
I'm also curious about if you, on the other hand, are not able or haven't been able so far to attract grad students, which is, of course, completely fine. I mean, we are here to help and discuss about that. Would you like to share with us the reasons why you are able to induct grad students? Is it because you don't have enough grad students? Is it because you're really not sure what to do with them eventually?
Yeah, sure. And as people are either chatting, writing in the chat or wanting to join us here on screen, we can talk about at my university, I know one major bottleneck we've had in bringing in new graduate students is we actually have a lot of departmental pushback where they really want to keep HKN at BU as an undergraduate organization. And we've been working hard against that misconception to encourage them to let us induct more and more graduate students or send us those graduate student lists.
So I've put the question in the chat just as a reference.
And I know there's a couple of chapter leaders and graduate students in the call with us here. I definitely encourage them to speak up. I mean, this is really a time to get out any conceptions you have on HKN or anything you want to see. You can post in the chat. Doesn't even necessarily have to be to answer your question. We're here to really gauge your insights into the topic of engaging and encouraging graduate student participation in HKN. So to pose another question to see if we can get some conversation, if you're a graduate student in HKN, what brought you to your organization? Were you inducted as a grad student? Were you inducted as an undergrad? Like what was your HKN path?
Oh, I see Fangis also put there an interesting question. If you have departmental difficulties, what are the resources available?
That's a really good question, Panegas. I think to answer that, there's a couple of different things that we see for our chapters, which is we see a bottleneck at the faculty advisor, and then we see a bottleneck at the department. And either one of these can make it difficult to induct grad students. You can either have a faculty advisor who might have a misconception, or a department head that has a different idea for your chapter in mind. And I think both of these, you can have a couple of different resources. You can either use the resources that we presented during this talk to show them like, yes, this is for graduate students. We'd like to push in this way. And if they're open-minded, that might get you a little bit of progress. Or alternatively, you can definitely reach out to us. I think reaching out to HKN, your regional governors, the president of HKN, or Nancy herself, we can really point you in the right direction to get people to come and talk to the people that are acting as bottlenecks and tell them like, this is HKN. It's meant to induct all of these parties. And as a chapter, you should be inducting all of these parties. And it might seem like, oh, that's just words, but they're really good at convincing university bottlenecks in getting the induction practices set. It's actually in the contract that they signed for establishing an HKN chapter to not thwart inductions. So inducting grad students is a key part of that. We're going to make sure that happens.
Of course.
If you want to add to that, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say, and in case you have a hard time, finding grad students because maybe the department head is not capable of providing a list of grad students. In my perspective, likely enough, my chapter doesn't have problems with grad students, but the thing I've found that works the best is the combination of advertisement and events. And sometimes we can see that an event has been successful when after that we get people who are looking to join us when we open the recruitment session. Because most times than not, word of mouth really works. And so if you're able to create something that is beneficial, for grad students, they're going to actively talk about that. Like I've seen this event that has been organized by HKN. I think it was really interesting. Might as well try and see if there's a place for me in there. Or even in my specific case, going through classrooms and presenting the association. In that case, of course, you have to have the approval of the professor. Otherwise, it might not be possible. But I've, in my personal experience, found always a helpful department in that sense. So it has been easy for me, at least.
Sure. And I know we have a couple minutes left here. I just want to encourage people, please either feel free to jump in the conversation with your own comments, or do you have any questions for us? Is there anything that's been bugging you, whether about induction or executing events or injecting value for graduate students, that we can help answer in these last couple moments?
Of course. And even if you your comment is, I didn't know, or I am currently not able to attract grad students, it's fine. I mean, we're of course not going to judge. On the opposite, we're here to help. So if you have any question or comment in that sense, it's really welcome.
And Kyle has a question here. Thank you for chiming in, Kyle. He asked, should a chapter host a lot of grad targeted events, or instead have all events be undergrad/grad combined? And I think part of that has to deal with your community interests. Sometimes when you look at undergraduate students versus graduate students, you can find a lot of overlap. Like they like meeting professionals, they like networking, they like learning about companies. And a lot of these events can be well adapted to a mixed audience. Like if you tell a company, we're going to have a mixed audience of undergraduate students and graduate students, they're going to bring relative positions to both of these populations when they come and give their company talk. But I do suggest, for the sake of letting each population feel a little bit more acknowledged through the chapter, it doesn't need to be every event or every other event, but maybe once a semester or once a year, doing something that's targeted at the differences between these two communities. So for graduate students, for example, since there's a lot harder time finding connections on campus outside of lab, maybe you can do a grad mixer night and invite grad students from multiple different graduate societies on campus, so the graduate students can interconnect and find new connections. For undergrads, well, they might be interested in grad school, and I don't think graduate students would be necessarily interested in finding a new grad school, hopefully. So you can do like a grad student panel, maybe even using the grad students in your chapter as panelists to have that event target at your undergraduate population. I think recognizing the intersection and differences between these two groups really goes a long way to showing the value in developing events for both and separate communities.
Absolutely. And in my perspective, I think that here we need to make a distinction. Like we can have public events, or we could also have events that are specifically targeted to our members only, because one thing that HKN can provide is exclusive events that are for our members only. It also helps in building the value of the HKN membership. Now, personally, I think that if we are talking about public events, in the interest of getting the largest amount of people, involved, I guess that mixing graduate and undergrad students, so finding a topic that can be interesting for both of these groups might be interesting. On the other hand, if we are talking about something that is exclusive to our members only, well, in that case, I guess we could go for a mix, a balanced mix of activities, something that might be more of interest for undergrad students, like how do you write in LaTeX, or how do you build your resume? Well, I guess that's also interesting for grad students as well, but how do you write a lab report? Those events could be led by grad students. So even though they're not directly targeted, but we can find a use for them, right? And then on the other hand, you could have something that is targeted specifically for grad students, like build your resume, or workshops, or talk me about your research activities, and so on and so forth.
We have a couple of good questions in the chat, one from Panegas and one from Andrea. So for Panegas, he asked, any advice on leadership? Would seniority play a role in the board elections? And since we just have a couple minutes, I'll try to answer this briefly. And if you're interested for a more elaborate answer, please message us after this. But when it comes to leadership, I know a couple of fears of chapters that don't induct grad students is they're worried since grad students are around longer, they're like hog the board positions and there won't be enough to go around. I think two aspects to keep in mind is, first and foremost, it's really up to the chapter what sort of dynamic you want to encourage. Like in our chapter, what we've done is we've had grad student leaders, not completely across the board, but as president or vice president. We ask them to run, they'll run for a year or two, and then we're actually asked them to move on and act as advisors for the next generation. And you'll find after a year or two, a lot of people are very enthusiastic to get the chance to, again, going to that mentee-mentor sort of desire that you find in these grad populations to move on and really help the next generation come in. So I think that seniority might play a role in a board elections, but I don't think you need to be concerned it's going to be something that would take over your chapter.
And there's also a question from Andrea. Andrea feels that it is actually the opposite, so it's more difficult to attract undergrad students than grad students. And what do you think is the reason behind it? Well, I guess Andrea refers to the situation we have at our chapter specifically, because we are basically on the kind of the opposite situation. We are good at attracting grad students, but undergrad is a little bit difficult. Andrea, I could answer that question, but I guess that it's something that is specific to our chapter. Before going there, I would actually like to address the next comment. Basically, it says, I've never been inducted by our local IEEE-HKN chapter, and I hardly know anything about the chapter activities. Which is interesting, and thank you for Nazneen. Hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly. Thank you for your comments. So you see, this is why it is important to build activities for grad students and let them know that we care about them by letting them know that we are thinking about them by organizing events for them. Because you join HKN, then you don't see anything of interest for you, and so you wonder, is really HKN for me? So yeah, as Katie says, you only need to be inducted once, but still, this is why I guess it's really important for chapters to build activities and advertise them and let other people know that we have all these interesting activities. And there's also another comment from Kyle. BE has semester-long terms and has ruled that one person can only serve in a role 2 times at most. That addresses the every grad student concern. Yeah, this is true for us as well.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think it is important to allow people to have the time in the sun in an organization and then encourage them to move on to more of an advisor role. Some chapters that I really like the structure of either have it so that president or vice president's like a 2-year role, where that second year, it's very clear it's more of a like advisor role than anything else. And what's nice is if you want to instate something like that, or if you're worried about something like that, you can update your chapter operations manual. It can be reapproved by the board, but the board loves seeing chapters finding their own creative take on how to effectively encourage leadership in their community. And I know that that's just about the time that we have for this session. So we can hang on for a couple other minutes just to answer any last minute questions. But first and foremost, thank you everyone for attending and listening to us chat. If you have any other questions, I put my email in the chat, and definitely feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, or concerns.
Of course, and I'm also going to write my email in the chat. Give me a second. All right. So yeah, I mean, is there any other question you would like for us to discuss? Otherwise, I guess I can try and actually answer. Andrea. Sorry, Andrea. Of course, we have some rules for undergrad students, so not everyone can join us, like not first-year undergrad students because they don't have enough exams under their belt, and so we have those limitations. I guess that is a cultural thing, like we of course have some technical roles for our specific chapter, so something that might require to have some knowledge in technical aspects, but most of our activities are actually organizing events, building social media posts, or HR activities, which is something that relies more on soft skills rather than hard skills. And this is something you can always learn and you should always polish, no matter how old you are. And so I guess that this is something one should try and tackle with the right advertisement. The things we have been saying can be adapted. some ways, I guess, for undergrad students as well. So get the word out. Just make sure that we let everyone know that we are looking for them. If they, satisfy our requirements, let's meet and talk and see if you can be a good candidate.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope to meet a couple of you at our region meet and greets happening just now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.